It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. I have been a long-term admirer of her advocacy work for at least 10 years now. As a long-term survivor of ovarian cancer, she works extremely hard to change the survival rates. We are extremely grateful that her efforts are focused on improving life for women through cancer research. Please make welcome the chair of ANZGOG's Consumer Research Panel, Wanda Lawson.
Do I need to click it on? Just that one?
I think so.
Let's try. This is not the correct presentation. Okay, slight hitch. Good job I have my notes. Well, we might have to go without a presentation because I can see that they've actually loaded the wrong presentation.
I'll find it.
Look, I'll just start talking anyway. As Karen said, my name's Wanda Lawson. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2004, and I'd just like to add my own personal, I guess, endorsement of what Di said earlier, because contrary to, sorry, the lady over there who said she was advised not to exercise through her treatment, I was very determined to exercise through my treatment, and I had a great surgeon who supported that. And I undertook quite a rigorous exercise program very early in my chemotherapy, and I did resistance training, hydrotherapy. I was lucky enough to participate in a trial exercise program in hydrotherapy for women diagnosed with gynecological cancers, and also did some light jogging towards the end of my chemotherapy. And I'm very proud to say that a year after completing chemotherapy, I actually went ice climbing in Alaska, which I think attributes to my core strength. I would have to say I'll never do it again because it was absolutely terrifying, but anyway, it was really quite good. So I'm just going to try and wing it a little bit without my presentation while they're getting it sorted out. Is it coming, or shall I just keep going? It's called the Consumer Research Panel. I'll read out what's on the slide so we don't miss anything. So ANZGOG is likely to have engagement this year with around 300 consumers, and that's on an annual basis. We speak to a lot of people. I'm the chair of the Consumer Research Panel. I've been involved with ANZGOG about 9 years now, and it was through Karen Livingstone that I was originally introduced to ANZGOG. My passion for, I've been an advocate for women. I don't know if anyone else is from the UK, but you might remember this little symbol here, because about more years ago than I want to remember, I was one of the women who wore earrings like this when we all protested at Greenham Common against the American missile bases way back in the 80s, I think it was. So I really love the fact that they have this on the ANZGOG brand. It's a real strong symbol for women. And I have been a passionate advocate for women ever since my university days. And when Karen asked me to get involved, I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right up my street. You know, I've been affected by gynecological cancer. I can now advocate for changes in outcomes for women. And one of the reasons I have done that is because I do believe and I understand that all improvements in the outcomes of women who've been diagnosed with the gynecological cancer have been made on the back of clinical trials. It is the way forward for us. And talking to consumers, what I believe consumers want the members of the Consumer Research Panel to do is to advocate for women affected with gynecological cancers want ANZGOG to innovate, drive support for and conduct research trials to improve outcomes for women affected by gynecological cancers. At every meeting that I have with the Consumer Research Panel team, we say that statement. I know it's a little bit old-fashioned now to talk about a mission statement, but I'm from the world of business. And again, about 15 years ago, they were all the rage, and I think it's really good to remind us why we do this. ANZGOG's Consumer Research Panel, I'm sorry I'm having to read, but I've got my notes anyway, which is just as well, but anyway, I'll keep going with it. The ANZGOG Consumer Research Panel is the mechanism for advice and input for gynecological cancer survivors and their carers to the Research Advisory Committee, the tumour working groups, the board of directors and our members. So we have a direct line in as consumers. The Consumer Research Panel, or CRP as I'll shorten it to now, helps ANZGOG to effectively represent the needs and expectations of gynecological cancer consumers, and it helps set general research directions and priorities and shape and research for ANZGOG. We are, as part of ANZGOG, we are really lucky enough to be at the forefront of participation in research. We just don't look at a form that's issued to a patient, a consent form, although we do look at that. We are right there in the development of the concepts. I've had two really gold moments at the ASM today, and one of those was when two researchers came up to me and said, you know, Wanda, based on the feedback of your consumer research panel, we're adapting our trial. We were worried about this little bit of the trial, and you guys picked up on it as well, so we're going to make a change to that. And you know, that's a pure moment of gold for consumers. The second one was in our Research Advisory Committee this morning, when I've been involved in that committee for 5 or 6 years. And when we first started in this, they would say, oh yeah, the consumers can stay for all of the concepts. Today, they said to me, Wanda, you have to leave the room. You are so involved in the development of this concept. When we discuss it, you will have a conflict of interest. And I think it was John, who's sitting over there somewhere, saw me leaping up and down with excitement. He said, Wanda, you look like you're floating on air when you worked out of there. And I was, because that is, it shows that here at ANZGOG, we work in partnership with our researchers, and we really do have the opportunity to influence where research is going for women and the outcomes for women. Why do we think we have the skills to do that? Well, on my team, I have people who support ovarian and endometrial cancer, lymphedema, Lynch syndrome. We have a carer. They come from New South Wales, Queensland, New Zealand, Tasmania, South Australia, and they cover city and regional areas. We have a couple of vacancies. Cervical cancer is not covered yet in some of the states, but we are still in a continuous process of recruitment. As well as the skills and experience, their lived experience with a gynecological cancer diagnosis, we have a business analyst, a mental health nurse manager, a health educator, a communications manager, a consultant in health literacy, a registered nurse, and a trial coordinator. So we do bring a really good skill set, and we utilise that skill set. And when I took over this panel a year ago, with Alison Evans, who's our CEO, we started to rigorously interview women, because participating and advocating for research is not for everyone. It's quite different from being involved in a support group. No less valid, but just different. So, it is important that you bring some skills. You bring the position of being able to be an informed consumer to that. Some of the activities that we undertake, and sorry, this slide is a little bit, can you still hear me, because it's a little bit, so we participate in, not only do we participate in reviewing the concepts and the information that comes out of the RAC, we're involved in working parties discussing the development of research. So, for example, the team, at this ASM, we're involved in the development of designing a dilator that's used by women in cervical cancer treatment after they've had radiation. I don't know if anyone's ever seen one, but it's a pretty ordinary piece of kit. So we're working with the team in an attempt to actually try and design a better dilator for the future. I personally have been involved in doing some what I call user testing. So there was the development of an online support service to manage fear of recurrence. And we tested that as part of our team. And as I mentioned, we're associate investigators on many concepts. So when we are doing what I call our core business, which happens about 4 times a year and prior to each of the Research Advisory Committee meetings, where our researchers submit their concepts, we review those concepts from the perspective of a consumer. So I'm not medically trained. I have no idea about the correct dose of chemotherapy to be delivered. That's looked after by many people. The concepts are reviewed by clinicians, statisticians, oncologists, radiation oncologists, all sorts of people, and consumers are only one part of that, and we look at the consumer aspect. So primarily what we look at is the safe process of a woman through a trial. We look at what's being asked of these women. Is it is it onerous? What is the financial burden to these women? Just to give you a little example of something that we picked up recently, in a trial that came out, the description was that a woman would go into hospital 1 week to have a blood test, and the following week they would go in to receive their treatment. We asked the question, do they need to be separate? Do they have to go? Can they have the blood test at the same time as they go in for the treatment? In this case, they could. How much time has that saved us as women out of our day or out of our week? So we really look at the little things like, little things. I don't think they're little things, actually. I think for many of us, they're big things. To enable our team to continue to participate in research, it's important that we stay across current trends. And this year we had 2 training sessions for the members of the team. One looking at the quality of life aspect. And again, as consumers, we very much look at, survival outcomes versus quality of life. So we got some training from the Quality of Life Office in what questions we should be looking at and making sure we're covering all the bases. We also got a presentation on health economics. For a lot of people, the cost of participating in a clinical trial is covered to the extent that you have the drug, but many other things are not covered. So, for example, the side effects that come out of the drug, you may have to take some anti-nausea medicine. That may not be covered. So we wanted to get a presentation on health economics, and ANZGOG is very proactive in providing us with ongoing training. Last year I was also lucky enough to represent ANZGOG over in the US. There's a group called CGIC, which is a international trials collaboration group, and for the first time ever they invited a patient advocate to one of their sessions, and it was an absolutely fantastic experience. I went on ANZGOG's behalf, and part of my role there was to go along to a meeting with the pharmaceutical groups and talk to them about the importance of data sharing within a safe space, so within a safe database, because obviously the pharmaceutical companies, some of them are developing drugs that do the same thing, so there's a little bit of friendly rivalry that goes on, let's say. And it's very important for us in a country where our population is quite low that we have statistical numbers to support getting a drug on the PBS. We were talking about an immunotherapy drug earlier. So we went and talked to these people about a willingness to share their information in a safe space which elevates the numbers of people to responding to a trial, and we can utilise that. On the back of that, I went across to an amazing cancer conference out there called ASCO, and there was 30,000 people at that conference, and it's the forefront of the cancer conferences in the world, and it was just a wonderful learning experience for me to meet and network and to be able to talk to other people about what we do and to understand what they do internationally. And one of the things I took away from that was the fact that they had this great patient space at the conference. So many of the people on the panel are going through, on the consumer research panel, are going through active treatment. You can imagine coming to a conference where we get to go to sessions that are presented by clinicians, and sometimes we see quite graphic pictures of surgery. Some of our people need a time-out space. So I brought that idea back from the US, and it was implemented by ANZGOG here, where we had our own room with sofas. So if there were any sessions that people needed to take a break from, they could come out and take a rest. I know we're running a little bit behind time, and I just wanted to briefly finish on a positive note and say some of the things that we are considering for next year going forward in our consumer research panel. I need some more members from some of our outlying states. I need cervical cancer to be covered. We don't have a representative at the moment. Our recent representative retired from the committee after many years of committed service. We want to look at health literacy of consent forms, and particularly inpatient information consent forms. Don't know if anyone's ever read one, but sometimes they are quite complex. We want to advocate for simple language and for translation of that consent form without falling into 4 basic language that are important here in Australia. We want to talk to our Indigenous populations in our remote areas. And I'm really sorry, I can't quite read the rest of my slide, it's a little bit down there. Ageing population, that was the last thing that we really want to focus on, the ageing population and the youth population. We're all, at the moment on the panel, we're all kind of middle-aged women, so we're looking for more representatives. Thank you very much for listening to me today.